I pop it up, and the first thing that comes up is
I hit the button. Yep.
All
All right. Hello and welcome to Tabletop Cafe, presented by Tabletop Journeys. You can think of us as a roadside diner along your tabletop journey, serving up bite-sized chunks of gaming goodness. I'm your host, Michael, and when I think of cons, I think of the melon drop.
Yep, we're good.
We're good? Okay.
And I'm your other host, Chris. And when I think of cons, I think of the great movie Con Air.
Oh, that's a good
And the great line, "Put the bunny back in the box."
Put the bunny back. Yeah, I love that.
We used to quote that movie all the time for years. So.
That is a really good movie in a lot of ways. We'll have to talk about that sometime. So we had some audio issues last time, so we're kind of vamping a little bit just to make sure that we can double check that the audio is good. So again, I'm Michael, and today we are here for a session of what we're going to call ConSessions, because we're trying to play on the food theme. And this is where we're going to talk about a recent convention that one or both of us attended.
The goal of the episodes is just to share some of our fun, but also look for any lessons that we can learn, what sort of things we might have experienced, and what we can do to make our next con experience even better, either as a player or as a GM. Yeah. We can always learn from both.
Absolutely. I am someone who goes to a lot of conventions. I didn't always, kind of famously, we've talked about this on our other show back at Detention. I had never gone to any gaming convention at all. And then I went to Gen Con for the first time, like I think 10 or 11 years ago now. And it basically changed my life. I had so much fun that I started my own convention, and I now go to half a dozen or more every year. I'm pretty lucky where I live. I'm kind of centrally located to I have obviously Gen Con, which is like the largest in North America, but also Origins, which is like 20,000 people, and then several in the like 500 to 600 person range. And this past weekend, I went to RiverCity Con, which is in Louisville, Kentucky, which is a couple hours from me. It's the second year that this con has been going on. It is hosted by the same group of folks who also run Lexicon and Sin City Con. So it's very much a board game focused convention where like they have role-playing games, but it is primarily a board game convention that also has role-playing games. Whereas a Catacon, the con that Chris and I work together and organize, is more role-playing games, but also have board games. So since I went to this one and Chris didn't, the structure of this episode is he's going to be asking me some questions and talking about things, and I'm going to share some of the fun I had, and again, some lessons learned. So Chris, ask me anything you want, buddy.
You said RiverCity Con, so I guess we'll start with what games did you play?
So one of my goals, because I did take my kids to this one. So I have two boys. John just turned 15. He literally turned 15 at the convention. And then my youngest is 13. He will be 14 soon. They have been playing RPGs with me since they were like 5 or 6, somewhere in that range. We started with No Thank You Evil, and then we've moved on to D&D 5th edition. And that's pretty much what we have played since. So one of my goals for them at this convention is I wanted them to play a bunch of different games, because they both have like D&D groups they play with on their own. Jacob's in a D&D club at school. And again, I love D&D, but I have found that the more variety of games I play make me a better game master. And I just think, well-rounded education as it were, I should say. So that was kind of my goal. So we played Dungeon Crawl Classics. We played a Call of Cthulhu game. We played a Fantasy Flight Star Wars game, and we played Kids on Bikes. I played one game without them, which was Dragonbane, because they wanted to play Blood on the Clock Tower, which is their favorite thing to do at conventions. They absolutely are infatuated with that game. They would have played it the entire weekend if I would have let them. Like if I hadn't made them, which they had fun, don't get me wrong, but they literally would have been like, no, we want to play this more. So they had a great time. But those were the RPGs that I played with them. And then one of those, we actually was just us three. The Kids on Bikes game on Sunday, we were the only players that showed up. So it literally was just us three playing together, which was kind of a great experience, all in all. But those were the games that we played. So Dungeon Crawl Classics, Star Wars, I played Dragonbane without them, Call of Cthulhu, and then Kids on Bikes.
Nice. How easy was it for them to learn the other games?
I think pretty easy. trying to think of it. So the Dungeon Crawl Classics is the one that I think it was one of the least successful, in my opinion, in what I was hoping for, because I was kind of
Okay.
hoping that these would all be like learn to plays, and most of them were. And it wasn't like the DM said this is a learn to play, so that it wasn't like that false advertising. But I was kind of hoping that we would get a chance to like really see what this game does differently than a D&D, which Dungeon Crawl Classics is very D&D-ish.
Mhm.
Like, some of the differences are not minor, but they're not obvious. But there was almost none of that. We pretty much jumped in. We were mostly rolling D20s. Higher numbers were better. We were fighting monsters. So it felt like a D&D game, which is, I love D&D, but it was the one that I felt like, I don't know that they could really articulate why you would play DCC over a D&D or that type of thing, where all the other games are pretty different. The ones they played. So Star Wars uses the proprietary dice system, which you're very familiar with, of course. So,
Yep.
build in the dice pool, you get advantages, disadvantages, boosts, setbacks, that kind of thing. And the game master did a good job of kind of like explaining how you were building, why you were building, the different ways you could increase the pool. When they got a triumph for the first time, he explained what that was. So he really did do sort of like a learn to play. The kids on bikes, because it was just the three of us for that one, it was, we had a lot of time to ask questions and get a feel for it. And then Call of Cthulhu is, percentile roll under. So everything we did was that roll. So I feel like all the others, they got to see not only how it was different, but maybe like why and how it changed the feel of the game. DCC was the one that didn't really do that.
Hmm. Did you go insane or die in the Call of Cthulhu?
Yes, we all ended in a very bad place. My character saw an elder god. Well, trigger warning. There was some body horror that I did to myself, and we all survived, but none of us were whole
Gotcha.
at the end of it.
Yeah, well, I mean that's to be expected with Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're not walking out there wiping the dust off your shoulders. Your character has significantly
Yeah.
changed by the end of a Call of Cthulhu game, if they've survived.
Yeah,
That's
right.
why I asked.
It was kind of an interesting scenario. I can just jump around to that because I don't know that it started that way. And I do feel like the GM, because my two boys were there, and then again, like they've been role playing for years, but they're still kids. We lean into the silliness, and it really kind of turned into like a Ghostbusters sort of thing. We were in a hotel where there was like a monster, and we ended up, it wasn't proton packs, but we were carrying these homemade, almost like I don't know, like you pump them full of air and you like spray pesticides.
Yeah.
But we had like an acid in there that we found out the monster was, it would damage it. So we were all walking around with basically like proton sort of packs, and we were talking to each other in walkie-talkies, even though I don't think walkie-talkies were invented. It was like in the 1920s or something. So it kind of became sort of silly, but it also was like, dark in some ways. And I feel like the GM was like, okay, I got two kids here. They're kind of getting bored with this, like, very slow descent into madness. So I'll give them credit for trying to liven it up a little bit, but I don't think it worked. They said that was by far their least favorite game. Now, I've had some great experiences with Call of Cthulhu. I have found that most of the times when I play in those events, the people are there to role play. Like that is their thing. So a lot of people will dress up, they will do accents, like they just really get into that, assuming the character. We didn't quite do that, but that's what I'm looking for in that game. And that wasn't what we were doing. And so then it just came across as kind of slow. You fail at a lot of stuff, somewhat intentionally, because you're supposed to fail. So of all the games, that was, I would say, by far their least favorite, even though the DCC game wasn't great either, in terms of what I was trying to expose them to. If that makes sense.
Okay. Well, Lee Winnicott just jumped in. He said the audio sounds solid, so
yes,
we're good.
Hopefully we got it right this time.
So with the Call of Cthulhu, I've run Shadow of the Demon Lord at cons.
Yep.
It leans very heavy into the horror. How did the GM handle having kids there? Because when I run Shadow of the Demon Lord, I put on there must be over 18. There are elements of fantasy horror, graphic descriptions, adult language, adult themes. How did the GM handle that?
So, well, in truth, they didn't do a lot of like pre-work for that. But the person who ran it, I have played with before at other cons because I just know
Hmm.
them by sight. I don't know if I could, I don't actually know their name. I don't know if they know mine, but we like definitely like, hey, how you doing? I saw you last year at this
Yeah.
con. So maybe because there was already that familiarity, there wasn't really a conversation at the start about that. I think they kind of knew what they were signing up for, I guess. And I was there. And again, my kids, they're my kids. So that says
Right.
a lot. But I will say at the DCC game, interestingly, the DM said this game is not for anyone 13 or under. And I said, both my kids are, over that. And he looked at my youngest and goes, how old are you? Like almost like he was like checking
Yeah.
me. And Jacob's like, I'm 13. But yeah, I mean, they're not squeamish at all in
Hmm.
those regards. So I don't know if I'm being totally objective, that probably was not great GMmanship of a con game when you have a mixed group of people and someone who is a child. But I think in our specific instance, because we have a familiarity, they trusted that if there was an issue, I would have addressed it beforehand.
Right.
I wouldn't have signed up for a Call of Cthulhu because I even told my kids, like, hey, this is a game, this is kind of what's going on. I gave them a little bit of a heads up, but they don't know that I did that.
Yeah. I mean, Call of Cthulhu, but as a GM that runs stuff at cons, even if I was going to run Call of Cthulhu, I think I would still put descriptions in there of this is a horror
Mm-hmm.
game. Um, I guess, that's just my thing because I want people to know what they're getting before they
Yeah.
sign up for the game.
We've talked about that for like, again, the Catacon is the convention that you and I, of many people, organize and run. And that is one of the things that I'm very passionate about is that when you fill out the submission for events, you need to include all those types of details, not just for like safety and for trigger warnings, but just so people know what they're signing up for. If someone wants that type of game, I want them to know that this is what they're going for. And if someone doesn't want that type of game, I don't want them to show up and be like, holy crap, I didn't know this was going to be here. So I'm a big believer in very detailed and thorough event listings that include the like body horror, humor, is it combat focused? Is it narrative focused? Pre-gens. Like, I just think that's really crucial information to include. And it's entirely possible that DM did. I don't remember, but my kids, I signed them up. Like I got them all their tickets, so they wouldn't have seen that anyways. And it's probably my fault for not sharing that with them. But I feel like I gave them a heads up of what to expect. So if anything, I succeeded or failed. I don't think I'll put that on the DM there.
Oh, that's fair. So which one was your favorite game then?
So that's kind of hard because I actually really enjoyed. I really enjoyed Dragonbane. That was the one I did. I played with my friend Brandon. It was probably the most like action packed. It was very much you're fighting monsters. We had a couple puzzles we had to solve. It's sort of the classic what you want to experience at a convention. Other really good players. The GM was solid. We were all like 40 to 50-year-old dudes. So, just we vibed with each other. And my best friend Brandon, who is getting back into this, I got to play that with him. So it kind of checked a lot of boxes for me as far as what I'm there for at conventions to do. And I just really like the Dragonbane system. I think I've said that before. That is a system I really want to experience more of. But the Star Wars game, we got into some hardcore nonsense, and that was John's favorite game. He had a blast with that, partly because the GM just let him kind of get away with some stuff, and it was really silly. The other players, it was me, Jacob, John, and my friend Brandon. And then there were two folks there who came to a Catacon last year and knew me because I ran two games that they were in. So I kind of felt like we all knew what we were in for. And the other two players didn't seem to be upset that my two boys were like kind of really rolling into the nonsense. Right. So it was a Star Wars game. It was very much like a heist sort of setup where we were supposed to go in and basically rescue the princess. But there was a couple complications, like all good heists. There were some things that we didn't quite know. But John's character was the Mandalorian, and they were in Beskar armor. So we had to get into the party So we were trying to figure out like all the different, classic ways. One of us got a job as security. One of us found someone to like convince to invite us as a date. One of us got in as like wait staff. And so John just drew a tuxedo on his best car. So like in his mind, that's what he was dressed up. He had a tuxedo drawn. So it's like a tuxedo t-shirt, Star Wars sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then the Wookiee just had a bow tie. So it was just like Chewbacca with a bow tie. That was basically the level that they were in for. And again, John just was cracking up the whole time. So he really had a good time there. I think Jacob had the most fun with Kids on Bikes, which was another game. So that was the one that was just the three of us. And this was the DM, but essentially all of our characters were part of an after school, like not a D&D club, but like a games club. So like, we had all these different, D&D was one of the things we referenced, but board games, card games, that kind of thing. But the club had an acronym, and I don't even remember what it was called, but the acronym was FART. So it's like friends and blah, blah, blah. So the DM gave us that, and we must have made conservatively 1,000 fart jokes. Like we were just talking about, like, we can't fart without our friends, because one of the members of the fart club is the first one that like disappeared because of the monster. But there was just so many fart joke references, and it was just so silly and fun. It was just the three of us playing, and the DM, again, it was as much their fault as ours, but that was the level we were going for. But we were kids in a group called Fart. So I had a ton of fun with all three of those. So Dragonbane, Star Wars, and Kids on Bikes, great times. Had a ton of fun. Though there are still a few nitpicks that I would have, both with those GMs and then some other of the games as well.
Okay. Before we get into those, do you feel like any of the GMs, when you walked up with your kids, went, oh, and changed their story because kids were at the table?
So the Call of Cthulhu GM, because when that game was over, they went to play Blood on the Clock Tower. So they took off, and I was still sitting there packing up, me and the other player and the GM. And they even said, I felt like your kids were getting a little bored, so we kind of had like a gunfight at the end. So there were like cops in the hotel that were trying to help keep people, like, for some reason, again, we were like the Ghostbusters. Suddenly they were letting us monster hunt. So the cops had kicked all the other guests out, the employees out, so that we wouldn't have to deal with them. And when we got to the final showdown, some of the cops showed up, and they were like trying to shoot at the monster, and we were losing our minds. So we became, partly evil. So basically we got to have like a gunfight in the middle, which normally you don't do, I think. And they said, I basically threw in a gunfight so they could have a little more action pack. So I think that was the one thing that I noted for sure. And again, just that the DCC DM who was like, nobody under 13. Are you sure that you're 13? But I didn't feel like, if they changed it, it was subtle enough that I didn't notice any changes.
That's good. The reason I ask is, I've run a lot of Star Wars, and I've planned, okay, this is going to be a pretty serious game. Here's the idea, and then get to the table, and it's 4 kids and 1 dad. I'm like, okay, well, you're all Padawans, you're this, you're that. And now I'm like, okay, the serious game I know is going to go silly. And the time I did that, they had a Wookiee that they were trying to disguise, like you were talking. And I threw in a very eccentric NPC who dressed the Wookiee and, braided his hair, put ribbons in it. And the rest of them started just adding stuff. And the poor Wookiee did not look tough at all by the time he got there. But what I thought would have been a 5-minute role-playing thing, they embraced for a good half an hour. Then they took turns describing how they disguised everybody else, and very eccentric colored outfits. There's no way they were sneaking into these outfits. They were all hoverboards and floating, and screaming basically, look at us. I was like, well, I guess this just went from you being subtle to you're now the center of attention. How are you going to deal with stuff?
So I think, the Star Wars GM, I will say, I think probably did, but I don't think it was because of my kids necessarily. It was just, Like they seem to be someone like for example, I think I even mentioned this like on a previous episode when we talked about Origins. Again, that would have been on detention. It was the same GM who ran the Origins game I played in, which was the Genesis system, which is like the generic Fantasy Flight story dice, but it was, more like a D&D fantasy story. And I think I mentioned that the dude showed up, he had 0 notes. Like he just had a GM screen, and either he's ran this one so many times, because I have a few D&D adventures I could run, from memory as well, but he had 0 notes. He was just ran the adventure, and he did a really good job, though there was this one weird thing in the middle, which I talked about then. So it was the same thing. Like he showed up, he had no notes. For the first half of that game, his DM screen was upside down. Like I noticed that. I was like, this is hilarious. And like halfway through, he turned it right side up because he had to reference a chart. So I don't know that there was a story, really. I mean, so either this is one he's just ran so many times, but we got into some goofy stuff. So I feel like he just had like a loose outline, and then the details were fine. Like it didn't really matter what we did in a way, So I don't think he changed it because there were kids as much as he just like, this is what happened because you were the players. The players happen to be kids, if that's a distinction that makes sense.
Yeah. So it sounds like he run games like I do sometimes.
Yeah.
Usually once a year at a convention, I come in with like one line, and that's all I start with. And then it's like, here we go.
Yeah.
Let's go with your characters and see where this goes. And I always put that in the description so people kind of have an idea that this is a completely improv game. You're coming in to build a story with me. I have no plan other than this one line. Or like the Star Wars Dread. All right, you're 5 Padawans, a ship crashes. Go.
Right.
I mean, that was all I really had. So
I think, so again, this is the second time I've played with him. And again, I have nitpicks and I have some quibbles, but for the most part, I was pretty impressed. I think he runs a fun game, and ultimately that's all I care about. So I would happily play another game that he ran. I would love if we can get him to come to a Catacon. I've mentioned to him a couple of times and run some games. I mean, I think he definitely fits in with the type of games that I want to run. But I will mention, because his was one of the games that I had a quibble with, which is, it's actually kind of funny, because I think I had a similar but different quibble last time we talked about it, is pacing. Because he let us get away with such nonsense, we kind of expanded the middle. So we had a solid opening, which makes sense. Again, if you're doing a heavy improv game, usually you have the opening and everything else you just kind of, go with. We got to the end and we had to rush the ending. And that is something that I'm a big believer you don't do. If you're running long in a convention game, you cut out the middle so that you can have your big climatic battle at the end, or whatever the case may be. We did the thing that I absolutely do not like in a convention game, where it's like, okay, we can't finish this encounter mechanically, so we're just going to narrate what happens. And I've done it too. It happens, but it's a pet peeve of mine, because if we're running long, you need to, in my opinion, the GM needs to recognize that and go, okay, we're going to cut out the middle because I want us to have this big thing at the end. And it's just sort of a pet peeve of mine that we had to just sort of like narrate what should have been the most exciting part of the game wasn't. So even though I had a ton of fun, we were laughing, everybody had a really good time, the ending not giving us time to really enjoy brought that one down in my eyes a little bit.
Okay, that's fair. I will say that is always the biggest point of my anxiety when I run a convention game. And I shouldn't say anxiety, but the nerves that I have is that pacing. I catch myself looking up at the clock a lot, and all right, am I on pace to get this done right?
Yep.
Okay, we're behind. I need to pull this out, or the clue I was going to give you over here is now going to be at
here.
This point where you're at somehow. Like I get very nervous about that, and I usually try to wrap up 15 minutes early.
Yes.
Just to help people get to their next game, or just to give me a break because I clean up and then I
have a game.
Do my next
right,
thing.
Yeah.
So I try, every now and then it does run over a little bit, but
yeah, I mean, there are things that happen. You're doing basically an improv sort of game. Even the most structured railroady games, you're going to have players who do things you don't experience. Dice rolls go against them. Like the combat that's supposed to be the learn to play combat that's supposed to be really easy goes really bad, and it gets longer. Like there are things that are going to happen. But just some of the general advice that I would give anybody is, one, I would never run a game at a convention that I've never ran before. And I don't mean the system, I mean the scenario. When I run something, it's something I have ran before, either with friends or with the family, or like at one of our faculty retreats. I would never just go in cold to a convention and run a one shot that I have not ran before, and usually multiple times. The one that I generally run now, I've ran 2-3 dozen times. I could run again. I could run with my eyes closed. So I am very like, okay, we're above pace, we're below pace. Oh, this is what I mean. I just feel like I know that, and maybe other people don't want to do that. Maybe it's fun for them to do it live. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but my general advice is you should probably have ran it before so that you can manage that and kind of have an idea for how it's going to go. I know John ran a session at a Catacon last year, and I made him run it for us before I would let him run it at the convention.
Mm-hmm. I 90% of the time, if not more than 90%, anything I write out, I have planned ahead, played it a couple times, tweaked the bugs out, or as odd as it sounds, like the combats that I'm kind of planning, I will do them at the table by myself to kind of see, okay, I think this is going to take 15 minutes. Oh, wait, I actually rolled the dice and it only took 5. So need to change something. Not going to say I haven't just written something out and shown up at a convention and been like, all right, we're going to run this, and tried to figure it out, and then went, okay, here's where my mistakes were. Here's where I had to pivot, and just make mental little notes on there.
But so that comes with experience. So again, if someone's been running games, even if they've never ran a con game, but they've been a DM for 10 years with their home group, or even like 2 years where they play regularly, like once a week versus like once a month, like I do now, you have the familiarity and experience. But I guess I'm talking more to someone who's like, I'm pretty new at this, but I want to go to a convention, I want to run a game. I would run it for a friends or family group, or maybe even online. If that's not, you don't normally play online, see if you can find some people to let you run it, or just be prepared in the moment to try to make some quick decisions. If it's a 4-hour session and 2 hours in, you're still on the opening scenario, you're going to have to make some adjustments pretty quick. Yeah.
Have to pivot pretty quick.
Because if you have to cut, it's better to cut the middle than the end. So,
okay. What were some of the decisions that GMs made that stood out to you?
So this is again, not to be negative, but this is another kind of a pet peeve of mine, and most of the DMs did it. So I don't know. I feel like this is something that I don't normally experience, because it stood out to me because it happened time and time again. So again, this is general advice. If you're fairly new, something to consider. I am a big believer when I run a convention game, the first thing that we do after because I almost always use pre-gens if I'm running a con game, is I let the players introduce their characters at the table. And I always say, it can be, I'm 5'7", I have blonde hair and blue eyes, but I'm more interested in, like, you've been hanging out with this group of people. What do they know about you? Are you the type of person who gets up early and does extra chores? Are you the person who tries to like find an excuse not to do your chores? Are you funny? Are you stoic? Are you generous? Like, give me a sense of the vibe. Like, we've been hanging out for months, going through the woods and fighting goblins. What do I know about you as a character? And almost none of the games did that. And I find it, again, this may be a personal thing, I find it very difficult sometimes to kind of like figure out where I fit in, both mechanically, like, how do my abilities work with yours? Am I supposed to fill this role? And not that you have to fill those roles, but just, I don't know. It's easier for me to figure out who I am in the game if I have a chance to say, this is who I'm playing, and these are kind of my general abilities. So for example, the Dragonbane game, which might have been the best ran game as far as like technical, I thought the GM handled that game very well. Both explaining to new players how it works, just managing NPCs, and it was a very well-ran game. We didn't do that. We didn't go around and introduce our characters. And I know Brandon, for example, he'd never played Dragonbane before, so he didn't really know who he was or how his abilities worked, but we didn't know who each other was. So like, we got into combat the first time, and I'm like, I'm the ranged person. Like, I'm playing the ranger, because no one knew, but in the game we would have. We've been hanging out for a while. So I just feel like that's a mistake. I'm a big believer in that you go around, and also, I mentioned this before, I feel like part of the GM's job is to get the players playing quickly. If you're sitting at a table and half an hour goes by and the GM is still talking and the players have not done anything in game yet, I feel like you're going to start losing people. So it's also just a technique to like, tell me about your character. Maybe even I might have make a skill roll as they're introducing their character, just so they kind of get some version of, okay, I rolled a D20, high numbers are better. I'm very observant. I just kind of helps like settle into their character. So I think that's something that pretty much every game should do, unless there's a specific reason not to. Like there's some games where that unease might actually be part of what you're going for, but 99% of the time, I really think they should let players introduce their characters to the table or have the DM do it. Because like in the Star Wars game where we played the heist, we had roles. One of us was the tech guy. One of us was the face. One of us was the muscle. One of us was the scout. So the DM who made the pre-gens kind of went around and like said, this is who you're playing. And, so for those archetypes, we knew who we were playing and everyone else knew, oh, that's the face. They're the ones that does this. This is our tech guy. They do that. So we were able to fall into those roles pretty easily. Still would have preferred if we got to do it, but at least the GM did it.
All right. So sticking with that, do you prefer when the GM hands you a pre-gen with a very detailed description of the character's personality, the inner relationships to the other characters? And the reason I ask this is like there was a game I played the first time I went to Origins, and we were playing a Stargate game. And the GM basically, I had a 2-page description of the character and then another page for all the stats. And he had it broke down to, your sergeant, so-and-so, to me, I was the high school jock. I was the guy that stood up and was like, I'm the biggest,
Baddest.
strongest, baddest boy, But what stuck out with me was there was a very detailed description about how my character is always trying to impress such and such character. Well, at the table, when I read that, I looked over and realized there's a woman sitting next to her husband, and that's the character that my character's trying to impress. And the description said he's always flirting and saying kind of inappropriate things to impress her. And my first thing, I looked right at her, I go, I'm going to have you read this description, you and your husband, and tell me where you are comfortable with this.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to ever cross that line. And we talked about, and inappropriate wasn't actually in the description, but it was flirting and
that's
trying
how
to
you read
impress
it.
her. Yeah, that's how I interpreted it. So instead I played it as he's a guy that's always like, if you're looking like, which way's north? He's like, it's over there. And he's flexing.
Yeah.
And he's always like, my shoe's untied. And he's always like trying to show her like his arms and trying to impress her that way, which actually turned out to be a lot of fun. But I felt like checking in with her and her husband going, hey, how do you, like, if you guys aren't comfortable with it, I got a pencil here and that will just get crossed right off the character sheet.
So that's an interesting question. I have had, I would say, success and fun, which are not always the same thing, with like the spectrum on either way. I've had some games where it's very open. It's like, you're basically, this is your archetype, but I could create any personality I wanted. I've had others where it was very detailed. So I would guess somewhere in the middle, and that's generally what I do as a DM, is I will fill in some information, especially like relationships together. But I'll say, you can change any of this you want. If you don't want that relationship, you want to change it, just, quick conversation at the table, kind of like what you did. I usually leave the name off there, gender, like you can, whatever you want, you can change it. But I'll even do things like if I'm teaching D&D, like I'll make a pre-gen that's a dwarf who's like a fighter. If someone's like, I want to play a fighter, but I wanted to be an orc. I'm like, okay, you're an orc. We're not changing the math for the one shot, but you look like an orc. So when you describe yourself, you can look like that, or you can look like a dragonborn, or you can look like, whatever the case may be, because I don't think it really matters that much. So whatever you want to describe your character, even armor, like you can have plate armor math, but if you want to say that you're dressed like Conan and you just have a loincloth, okay, you're dressed like Conan, but you have 17 armor because your character says armor, plate armor. I don't think those matter that much, especially if I'm trying to teach the game, which usually when I run D&D at a convention, this is for someone who's never played before, or maybe someone who's coming back from an older edition, hasn't tried 5th edition. So I don't think that gets in the
Mhm.
way. If that makes
I
sense.
do the same thing. Running Star Wars, the character generator I use to make the character sheets, you pick a species, you pick a gender, like you have to pick that stuff. I might throw it out there and be like, all right, I've got a computer slicer. It's a droid. And somebody goes, oh, I was really hoping to play a Rhodian. Cool, you're a Rhodian.
Yep.
Change it from droid to Rhodian. It doesn't change how those skills are going to work for this one shot.
Mhm.
Long term, it might, because there's other things that go in with that. But for this one shot, don't care. You're now a Rhodian.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, I ran one where everybody was force sensitive, and one of the players was like, "Oh, I was really hoping to play a droid." I'm like, "Well, here's a droid from a different module, but just be aware you have no force powers. You're not going to be mechanically as good at things as they are." Well, then the player just embraced the whole, "Well, I'm the library."
Mm.
So anytime they got some, the player, she would go, "Oh, well, that is a sequoia tree. Then they are from blah
Mm.
blah blah, and you shouldn't do this because of this." And like just list off a bunch of random facts, and like everybody at the table would look over and be like, "Oh, thank you. Can we now climb them?" Like, please be aware there could be such and such creatures up there, which was great for me because then you know it helped me as the GM. Be
Right.
like, "Oh, well, yep. There's now you know a monkey lizard up there that now attacks you, and now my combat's changed." But
Right.
I agree that you can change things at the table.
Right.
It doesn't hurt anything. But I definitely think having a little introduction, like you said, and letting the players kind of be involved with it. Again, running a lot of Star Wars. A lot of times, like one of my favorite ones I run, none of the players know each other.
Right.
You all work for Jabba the Hutt.
Mhm.
I start off with be like, okay, Michael, you're playing, I'll stick with the droid slicer. Why do you work for Jabba the Hutt?
Right. Yes. Getting the players involved, they're making decisions about their character. I just feel like
Yeah.
it helps you sink into that role so much quicker. Even if it doesn't really matter, like you set the parameters, you work for Jabba. You don't get to decide that. Why? Are you in
Mhm.
debt like Han Solo? Are you a disciple and you're like, I want to move up in the organization? Like you get to have these little motivations that probably may not even really come out. It's like private play in your own head. But I just feel like that's such a better way to get people in the game so much faster.
Yeah.
So,
And I like doing that because I can also use that in the game to push them. So if you're playing the droid and you said, "Oh, I have gambling debts to Jabba," pretty good bet that at some point somebody's going to offer you money
money,
to maybe do something that isn't part of your story, or even betray Jabba
right?
to get rid of your debt somehow, or whatever the plan is. Or if you told me, "Oh, I'm trying to impress Jabba because I want to take Bib Fortuna's job." And for those that aren't quite as Star Wars nerd as I am, Bib Fortuna was his Twi'lek little sidekick
Yeah.
or assistant. But now I can use that in the game and say, "Oh, you know, you can't be Jabba's personal assistant, but now Marlowe the Hutt comes in and talks to you about it.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do?" Um, I like that because it adds a little more depth to the story that I wasn't planning.
So, also from like a high level, I have had instances where I can kind of tell based on how they respond to those questions who might be more comfortable with like
Hmm.
player narrative, like let people roll, and who might want to just sort of like be more introverted, which I'm fine with. I want you to have fun, and I don't want to put you on the spot. So it kind of helps me gauge who I can push, who I need to pull, who whatever the case may be. I can kind of get a sense of their personality at the game, and it just kind of helps me, I think, be a better GM for that group and that particular person. So the
Hmm.
people who were like, I don't know what's a good answer versus like the person who's like, oh yeah, I want Bib Fortuna's job. Like they obviously know Star Wars. Like it just gives you
Hmm.
information that you can possibly use to make the game better. So I think it's just a good idea all the way around to do that.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of asking the players questions to get them going. The Padawan game I run, two people are playing Padawans. Yes, they're teenagers, but right off the bat, I'm like, cool, who is your, I hate the word master, but that's what they use in
Yeah.
Star Wars. I usually try to say, who's your mentor?
Mm-hmm.
Who's the one that's training you? And let them describe the person. I love when people say, oh, I want to be, kit fist do's. I'm like, well, this guy can't do the accent, so pretend I have
Yeah.
all the tentacles on my head, and I'm a green guy, and here's his speech to you.
Yeah.
Um, and then I was asking, what color's your lightsaber? And I was like, watching him go, huh, blue? Okay. Well, why did you pick blue? And they always go, what do you mean? I go, why is your character, why did the crystal pick you and why is it blue? That's where I'll know the Star Wars lore nerds, because I go, oh, I'm a guardian, blah, 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 or because of this or because of that. And it helps me, like you just said, understand
Yeah.
who's going to go deep in the lore and who's going to look at me when I say, such and such name, and they go, who? I'm like, okay, well, that's an obscure character. So we just won't worry about who that really is,
Right.
type
Yeah.
thing. So,
Yeah. No, I think it's a good idea. I'm sure there's someone out there listening now or in the future who's like, this is why I don't do that. And you might have a completely good reason. You're not wrong. But for me, and especially in general, as both a player and as a DM, I really think giving people a chance to interact very quickly is helpful. And then I think that's specifically by having them introduce their character. It's just an easy and good way to get that process started.
when you were doing the Star Wars game, since the Fantasy Flight game does use the funky dice, did they give you cheat sheets to use that you could look and go, okay, I rolled the explosion looking symbol. What does that mean versus?
No, but we did have like a little tutorial. So
Okay.
like the character sheets they gave us had the actual symbols. So like if I had this skill, it was like one yellow in the hexagon
Okay.
and then two greens in the square. And we did do a little thing at the beginning where they said, this is a success, this is an advantage, this is a failure, this is a disadvantage. They cancel each other off one for one. And I do think like we caught on pretty quick. Like we were able to say what we had. Now, one thing I didn't know, so the DM didn't roll the defense roll. Like they rolled it in public. It wasn't hidden, but they didn't roll it out in a way where it was on the player to do the math. We would just say, I have 2 successes and 2 advantages. And then they would tell us what happened, but they didn't say I had 2 failures and 3 disadvantages. So you technically have a disadvantage. They just told the story or moved the story forward based on that. So there was some of it was kind of hidden. And I've played that a couple of times, by no means an expert, but the way I've kind of shorthanded it is I always be like 2.1. I have a 3.1. I have a 3.5. Number of successes versus advantages to make it easy for that person to kind of know what was going on. So and a couple other people kind of picked up on that and they would do the same thing. I got 2.2, 0.2. So it got to be pretty quick because we only had to say what we had. And then the GM did all the math of where that went and what it meant.
So you only rolled the positive dice.
Yes.
He rolled the negative.
Correct.
So that's different. I run it where you roll everything in together, and then you cancel things out.
Yeah, I kind of thought that was not the same way we had done it in the past, but I didn't know and I didn't care. But I was like, I kind of felt like in the past I've rolled all of the dice. But
well, it could be for ease of learning and teaching.
Yeah.
Could also just be that helped the GM have a little more control of the story.
Yeah.
Because he could have rolled behind the desk and been rolling, fate dice and been like, "Yep, you failed. Yep, you succeeded."
Yeah.
You don't, who knows? But I could see where that would be a little bit of a learning tool where you could just go, "Okay, you rolled a triumph and 2 successes, and behind the screen I roll and go, okay, well, I have 2 failures and a threat, so this cancels this out. So you end up with this." So I can see where that would work. I've just always done it the other way.
Yeah. So I will say, because I'm very complimentary to that GM. I think they run a good game. I had a ton of fun with it, but they did do a couple things that I thought was weird. And so I want to call this out. So for one, we had a 6-player game. And I know I've said this before. I don't like more than 5 players at a game. I know conventions, that's very normal. The DCC game, we had 8. I think that's too many. I really think it's hard in a 3 or 4 hour game for everyone to get enough time to do their thing with that many players. So it's a personal thing. It's subjective. I don't like it. So one, I think we had too many players, and I think that fed into this thing. So the DM did this. The thing is really weird, and I don't understand it. So if GM, you're listening, I think you did a great job, but I don't understand this one decision you made. So again, we were doing all kinds of nonsense, and the GM was, for the most part, rolling with what we were doing. Like again, we drew with a Sharpie a tuxedo on Beskar armor and got into a party. Like that is the level of nonsense we were having, right? Well, the Wookiee character, which was played by my friend Brandon, was our hacker, our slicer, right? So we got into
Okay.
the house. It was like a lord's manor, palace, Jabba sort of thing. And they're like, okay, I want to try to find a data port that I can act as. Like I need to
Hmm.
get into the computer system so that I can hack and get a schematic of the layout or whatever. And the GM's like, you can't find one. It was so weird because everything else, they were just like, yep, that happens. Yep, we'll roll with it. Yep, that happens. And then Brandon, like the most normal, mundane things, like, I'm a hacker. Can I find a data port? No. He never found one. The entire time we were inside this place, he never got to slice anything. So
Hmm.
he kind of didn't do a lot. I felt kind of bad for him, and I kept trying to like bring him in and like add him to what I was doing so that he got a chance to play. And then at the end, when it turned into a combat, he got to do cool stuff because he's a Wookiee. But it was just the weirdest decision that I don't understand. Where maybe it was a pacing thing, and he was afraid, well, if because there was like a secret passage, so maybe he thought, well, if he has a schematic, it'll mess up how quickly we can get from places to places. But with the amount of shenanigans that we got to do, I found it baffling that this one character just couldn't do the thing that they're good at, and they kind of became a spectator for like a good hour. And I was like, I don't know. I do not understand. I don't know if I don't know if it was like a brain fart, like they just didn't realize that they had secluded or excluded this character. But yeah, I have no idea why they did that. I think they're a great GM. I do not understand that decision at all.
Yeah. If I mean, a hacker is one that if I put in a character, I've got a specific story point that they're going to have to be used. In that case, I mean, if you came up with something I wasn't expecting, and I'm like, ooh, that's going to ruin something, I would have been like, roll a perception check. You roll the dice. Oh, unfortunately, you didn't find one in this area. Or you find one, but it really only connects to the serving droids. It doesn't connect to the building layout.
Mm-hmm.
You happen to find the one behind the bar that's all about the ordering drinks and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you can slice in there, and now you can have some fun ordering random drinks for everybody
Right.
and
Or
running
messing
a,
drinks up. Like you can find a way to
yeah.
use that. And it's like a stalling technique where it's like, okay, I'm going to let you do something with this. That's not what you wanted, but it makes you feel like you did something. It adds to the fun. And then like 20 minutes from now, I'll come back to you. Then I'll let you because I've had time to process. And, again, it's
Mhm.
part of the pacing. So maybe that's what it was. And they just lost the plot because of all the other things and they never circled back to them. But again, baffling decision for some reason. But again, maybe there
Yeah,
was a reason. I just don't understand.
who knows? I mean, you enjoyed the game,
Yeah,
so it didn't ruin anything.
no,
It's just one of those kind of scratch your head moments.
yeah. I mean, I'm sure I do. I do dumb stuff all the time, and I'm not even gonna say dumb. Like that's not the word I should use. I do baffling things all the time. But as an outside observer, that one stuck out to me, and maybe because it was my friend Brandon. Like I was hyper aware because I really
Hmm.
want him to have fun. He was very excited about the Star Wars game because he's never played Star Wars before, and I just wanted him to have a great time. So maybe I was like overly uh,
Sensitive.
sensitive brain, not work, to the fact that I felt like he wasn't having as much fun as everyone else seemed to be. So maybe that's just what it was. But yeah, it definitely stuck out to me. But overall, again, I had a wonderful convention. Kids had a great time overall. Mostly, I didn't say mostly, pretty much all positive experience. Even the ones that weren't great weren't terrible. Like I didn't have any game where I walked away going, oh, I wish we hadn't signed up for that. I had a couple where like, that could have been better. Or more specifically, I don't think that was a great representation of that system. And that's what I was hoping for my kids. But I had fun at all of them.
See, and I've had that experience where I've walked away from the table and been like, "Whew, I don't know if I ever want to be in a game with that GM before." or
Yeah.
again, and if that's the system, I never want to play it again. And I mean, it was Call of Cthulhu,
Hmm.
and I'd never played it, but I just heard about, you might go insane, you might die. I'm like, that's cool.
Right.
But the story was, you're going to follow my story, and at the end, you're all going to die. There's no way to escape this. And I'm like, okay, as a GM, I would never do that. Not outright. I might keep leading you in that direction, but the whole idea is we were in Canada on vacation and we find dead bodies in the house next to us. I'm like, well, I leave.
Hmm.
It's like, okay, you wake up naked back in the cabin. I
Yep.
leave. You wake up in the cabin naked. Okay, so we can't leave. Like, as a GM, I would have been like, okay, you're trying to leave. Okay, you hear, spooky voices. You hear growling in the woods. You hear, try to build that horror. And now you're like, oh, maybe I don't want to go out there. Maybe the bad thing is really out there. And in the end of that one, I just had a hard time buying the story
Mhm.
because we were all outsmarted by raccoons. And then we were fed into a portal to some elder god at Eton. I'm like, I'm not saying I'm a genius, but I think I might be able to outsmart a raccoon.
You would think so.
But again, the GM loved that game. He loved running it. A few other players liked it. I was just like, well, if this is Call of Cthulhu, I don't think I'll be playing this
Right.
again. But I've had other people run it after that, and I'm like, okay, this is more what I was thinking. And I have zero problem with my character going insane or dying. But give me the feeling that it was my choice
Hmm.
and not just you as a GM telling the story that you wanted to tell, and
Right.
my character is going to die the way you wanted it to die.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, just off the top, I think in that type of situation, either you need to give the character a motivation for not leaving. So like there's a loved one that they don't want to leave, or just like if you're in the like Canadian wilderness, like before you get to that part, there's a storm that blows in. You take shelter.
Yeah.
There's a blizzard. No one's leaving for 3 days. Then things start going wrong, and you're like, okay, well, I know I can't leave, so then I will engage with the spookiness. But yeah, if there's no narrative reason for me not to just leave, again, I get the point that you're in a game. You need to interact with the rules. But I'm at least going to play lip service to the fact that I'm an intelligent person that's not going to go into the basement with a serial killer unless there's a narrative reason like, oh, well, there's a reason that even if it's so silly or light or whatever, give me something to at least let me go, okay, I would have to engage with this story at this level. Again, it's a minor thing, but I do agree that sometimes I need that to, especially if it's like the horror, like if it's a D&D game, yeah, I'm going to kick down the door and slay the dragon. But if I'm playing like a Call of Cthulhu where I'm like a person who's like, I'm a doctor and I'm on vacation, the doctor's not going to go check out the spooky sounds in the basement. They're going to leave. That's what we would do. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to call the cops and go, I think Jim's head's in the toilet.
yeah, I didn't look much further than open the door, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah, exactly. I'm with you on that one. So
But I'm also if you put me, Chris, in a horror film, it's going to be a really boring movie.
oh yeah.
Because if we walk in like, hey, Michael, Jim's head's in the toilet. I'll go get the car. I'll get the car started.
Yep.
Oh, the car won't start. Well, one of us is not going to make it. It's going to be whichever one of us runs out of stamina, because I'm not investigating why Jim's dead.
Yeah. My favorite thing
that's
is
not
when
happening.
the reason they won't drive is because the tires are flat. I will ride those rims
Yeah.
until,
There'll
just
be
go.
sparks going everywhere until I hit the brakes, and then I'm just going to keep
Yep.
driving on the rotors. Or I'm just going to go to the neighbor's house, take their car. So,
But anyway,
but were there any other moments that stuck out in your head as far as things we could learn from?
I'm trying to think of going through each game. Well, I said that the Dragon Bait game, which again was a lot of fun. There was a really cool kind of riddle. It's one of those like logic puzzles, which I'm a fan of, where we had to find, there were like 5 multicolored gemstones. And then there was a riddle where it was like, blue can't be next to green. Green is in the west. White has to be next to blue. And like, it's sort of a silly thing, but it really worked thematically, and it was a fun thing. And we actually sat down and like I'm a person who sometimes will set up a trap or a riddle and I don't know the answer. And I'm just like, when someone comes up with something that makes sense, I'll roll with it. I don't always do that, but I certainly am not afraid to do that in some situations. But there was a nice feeling of there's an actual answer to this. And we just all sat down and like worked it out and we solved the puzzle and we all felt smart when we did it, you know? So that was a cool moment. It was kind of a cool story. Yeah, I mean, I really like Dragonbane, so I think that might be one of the reasons why it was my favorite because it's a game I want to keep playing more and more of, and I really had a good time. I kind of want to run like a not a full campaign, but I want to run a multiple session Dragonbane game. I'm very interested in that, so I would say yeah, Dragonbane. But again, even the ones I didn't love, I liked. So for me, because again, last time I went to Gen Con and Origins, I had a couple like doozy bad games. So this was like top tier. No complaints. Happy to do it again.
Oh, excellent. So, what are some other reasons somebody should go to this convention? How was the food? How was the lodging?
So they do have a concession stand, which is not terrible. Again, Catacon, that's one of our pet peeves there is that the concession stand isn't always great. There's also an actual restaurant because it's actually in a hotel. So there's an actual restaurant. So, it's expensive because it's a restaurant, hotel, restaurant, whatever. But it's better food and it's, reasonable. It's pretty small still. I think there's only like 300 people there, which again, when a Catacon started, we were like 120. So it's small enough and it's sort of self-contained enough, but there was still a good variety of games. Like, I mean, really, I went to a convention, DCC, Star Wars, Kids on Bikes, Call of Cthulhu. There's a lot of conventions out there that even that level of variety, I don't think, and was available. So I was impressed with the variety of games. I will say that because it's a board game focused convention and RPGs are kind of not also ran, but they're not as prioritized. The tables were too close together. We had like 4 tables in one room, 2 tables that were basically just out in like a hallway, and then 4 tables in another room. So there was some noise issues. The game on Sunday, we actually kind of lucked out where we were the only people in there for like 2 hours of our game, and then other people moved in. So it went from being like, we have the place to ourselves to kind of loud. But you're going to get that at every convention. But this one seemed like worse than some of the others. I think 3 tables in a room would have been better than 4. But again, I go to the DCC. Sometimes you don't have choices on what you have to do. Price-wise, it was a reasonable cost for my kids. Attached hotel was reasonably priced. We actually didn't stay there, but I did last year. So it's for me being 2 hours away, it's convenient in location, convenient in cost, and a variety of games I want to play. So yeah, I definitely will be back next year.
Excellent. Final thoughts on your experience, your kids' experience. Did they win Blood on the Clock Tower?
I actually
Like, I
think
mean,
they both
if you
won
win, but
every time. Like they were on the winning team for they are pretty good at that game apparently. But yeah, they absolutely loved it. So Blood on the Clock Tower, run that. You will be successful. People will play in your games, and go to conventions. Go to Catacon, go to Gen Con, go to Origins. If there's a local con near you, go to it. Support the people who put it on, and get it some experience. There's a lot of value in a bad experience. Now it sucks in the moment, but if you're someone who wants to be a better GM, obviously you can listen to podcasts, you can listen to actual plays, but going to a game and playing a game and going, oh, that GM did this thing that I loved, or this GM did a thing I hated, is going to make you a better GM. So I'm a big believer, if you can afford it, I know not everybody can, but if you have the ability to go to a convention, I think it's highly worth it from an experience to become a better player. You might find a game that you would not have played otherwise, and it becomes a favorite, if not your favorite game. So I'm very much pro local gaming cons. And if you're in Dayton, Ohio, I got a con in November.
Mhm.
So
I agree with you.
yeah,
I mean, I don't go to as many cons as you do, but uh, I like going and trying new games, whether it's role playing, board games. I like some cons I go to are smaller and I'll see the same people over and over. And, you have that kind of camaraderie of, hey, how are you? It's been a year. How's life? You going to play that game again? Nope. Cool. What are you running this time? And just talking with them. I think it's a great way to learn new games. It's a great way just to build new friends too. I mean,
Yeah. I have con friends, like, again, at this con, there were people I'm like, I played with you. And when I go to Gen Con, even though there's 70,000 people, I still see faces that I'm like, I may not know your name, but we've played together. And that's great. So I'm a big fan. We have something coming up. You don't go to many cons, but you and I have a big event coming up in 2 months now, 3 months, something like that. It's March, right?
2.5-ish.
April. It's April. Yeah. So February, March. Yeah. So 3 months roughly. We're going on a D&D cruise.
I'm excited. I'm waiting for our schedule so we can know what games we're playing, or at least when we're playing games. Then we can kind of figure out the other stuff. I'm kind of waiting to see what they do on the ship too. I've heard a couple of people I've talked to say you got to go to one of the game shows. They're like, it's a riot. I'm like, okay, if I can, I will. It just depends on when it is, what it is. If it's a spelling bee, I'm out. Just telling you right now, don't bet on me.
Yeah.
Unless it's going to be, spell cat, yay, and then they ask you to spell Lee Winneka's real name, and I'll be like, I win.
Or first person out. Bet on me to be the first person out if it's a spelling contest. Yeah.
So I'm excited for that. I'm excited to see how the games play, because on their Discord, it seems like everybody's pretty intense about some serious gaming. So I feel like we're not going to have a bad table. I feel like it's going to be pretty.
They're going to be telling stories about us. Like, we were serious and these two dumbasses were.
Yeah. They kept making sandwiches in the middle of every game.
Oh yeah.
Or they kept getting distracted by the paintings on the wall and, asking for riddles and stuff like that. Yeah. But I'm excited. The shore excursions are going to be fun too. Yep. Waiting for some, rich person to tell us they're going to rent us a private cabana for $6,000 for 3 hours. Yeah. And then you and I will take a nap while the wives swim and complain that we're sleeping.
Yeah. That's all.
Yeah. They paid $6,000 and all you guys are going to do is sleep. Oh, it's not my $6,000. So
best nap I've ever had. We also have a faculty retreat coming up next month, February. So we're definitely going to chat about that. So there'll be a bunch of these ConSessions throughout the year. So hopefully you got some value in this if you're watching now or in the future. If you're not already, please consider subscribing to the Tabletop Journeys YouTube channel. There's a ton of stuff coming out. Lee Winneka, myself, and Josh, we're still finishing up reviewing the Dungeon Master's Guide. We have some actual play stuff coming out, the class warfare. We're going to be doing some interviews and reviews. So there's a lot of different things that'll be coming out. Plus, Chris and I, we won't be doing this every Wednesday. We're going to try to do it as often as we can. But if you like and subscribe, ring the bell. Whenever we go live, you'll get notified. And we'd love to hear from you. Please, if you have local cons that you love, drop them in the comments. If you're going to be going to any of the cons that we're going to go to. So I'll be at Lexicon, Sin City Con, CincyCon, Origins, Gen Con, and of course, a Catacon. Let me know if you want to play in a game together. We'll see if we can make that happen. So any final thoughts from you, Chris, as we wrap up?
Just have fun at them. Go to conventions, just experience something new, or continue just experiencing the same things you love about it. I love Kaylee's sentence or statement that convention is a room full of people that are all your friends. You just don't know their names yet.
Mm-hmm. And maybe never do, because I'm terrible with names.
You and me both. That's why I love name badges, because then I can stare and be like, hey, I remember playing games with you. You're Steve. Yeah. And hopefully they don't change. Maybe that's what I'll do at this next convention. I'll just write a random name down every day and just keep changing
changing it. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. And then confuse myself, and everybody's like, hey, Xavier. I'm like, who the heck is that? But otherwise, can't wait for the faculty retreat, because it's also my 50th, which is nice, because then I don't have to paint my house black or not paint it black, but
decorate
have everything dressed as black. Yeah. So I'm sure somebody will bring a coffin or something and make fun of me being 50. And the real fun part with that for me is you can't walk in and be like, here's your walker, old man. I'll be like, that's what I do for a living, buddy. Yeah. Did you pick this one up at Goodwill? Yeah, I've already got 50 if I need to. So
you're a couple minutes ahead of me. Those. So you're 50, then I'm just a little bit behind you. But yeah, those faculty retreats are some of our favorite, at least I'll speak for myself, some of my favorite events of the year. Not as much role playing there, a lot more board games, card games, just because of the nature of the environment. But this is a new experience. We're renting an Airbnb for the first time. It's a big, 3-story condo. We got the whole place. It's going to be either a disaster or the best one yet. But either way, you'll hear about it from us when we get back. So
We'll find out.
yeah, one way or the other. So I'll just sign off as we always do. Just remember, if you're having fun, you're doing it right. So we'll see you next time.